A nervous intern entered the wrong meeting room, unaware her millionaire CEO would fall for her confidence. "Who are you and what are you doing in my boardroom?" The voice, calm but sharp, sliced through the heavy air of the glass-walled meeting room. Mark Caldwell, the 32-year-old CEO of Caldwell Industries, looked up from the head of the long, sleek table, eyebrows slightly raised. His team, seated on either side of him, turned in unison to face the intruder. Sarah Harper froze in the doorway. She had taken a wrong turn. She knew it the second she stepped into the room and saw the intimidating wall of suited executives and pitch decks glowing on a massive screen behind Mark. Her breath caught in her throat. Heat rushed to her face. I'm so sorry," she stammered, clutching her tote bag tighter. "I think I walked into the wrong room." She began to back away, but not before quickly sweeping a lock of blonde hair across her left cheek to cover the faded scar that curved beneath her eye. It was an old burn mark, one she'd spent most of her life trying to hide. Her voice trembled as she bowed her head and turned on her heel, heart pounding like a drum. Just a few minutes earlier, Sarah had stepped into the building with shaking knees and a heart full of hope. It was her first day as an intern in the marketing department. Fresh out of college and full of nerves, she had rehearsed every moment of this morning. But nerves had gotten the best of her when she saw the maze of elevators and identical meeting rooms on the 24th floor. In her anxious hurry, she had misread the number on the door. Inside the elevator, she had practiced how she would introduce herself. "Hi, I'm Sarah Harper, the new intern. I'm really excited to be here." But the words had died in her throat the moment she'd stepped into the wrong room. Now she was walking briskly down the hall, eyes glued to the floor, willing the ground to open and swallow her whole. She could still feel the heat of that room on her skin, the attention, the weight of Mark Caldwell's gaze. Back inside the boardroom, Mark glanced at the closed door, his brow furrowed, not with irritation, but curiosity. There was something about the way she had stood, startled, awkward, vulnerable, and yet not defeated. She had spoken with quiet dignity despite her panic. Something in her eyes just before she turned lingered with him. She had made a mistake, sure, but she had handled it with grace. He turned back to his team, gesturing for them to continue, but his mind stayed with the girl in the doorway. Her face, her voice, the way she had covered that scar, as if hiding a story. He wanted to know what that story was, and as the meeting resumed, his assistant leaned in and whispered, "Should I check who she was?" Mark shook his head. "No," he said simply. "Let's just see where she ends up." That afternoon, Sarah found herself seated quietly at a small cubicle in the far end of the 22nd floor. Her name badge was crooked from her shaky fingers. No one paid much attention as she unpacked her notebook and tried to settle her nerves. She kept her head down, afraid someone might have recognized her from earlier. But even as she buried herself in files, her thoughts kept drifting back to that brief moment. The way Mark Caldwell had looked at her, not with anger, with interest. It was just a moment, but it would change everything. Sarah Harper did everything she could to go unnoticed. She wore long sleeves and high collars, even in summer. Her blonde hair always fell just enough to cover the faint scar that curled beneath her left eye. She kept her head down, her voice soft, and avoided the company's group photos like the plague. There were no selfies on her social media, no tags, no trace of her beyond her name on a resume and her seat at the far end of the marketing floor. To most of her colleagues, she was just the quiet intern. But what they did not see, what no one really noticed, was how she never once missed a day, how she offered her lunch to the receptionist once when her order was messed up, or how she stayed behind each evening to stack chairs after meetings. She did not speak much, but she always helped. That Thursday morning, as the office buzzed with quarterly deadlines, Sarah was in the basement archives helping Mrs. Dempsey, the oldest employee in the company, push a heavy cart of old binders to the elevators. Most people avoided the task. It was tedious and dusty. But Sarah had noticed Mrs. Dempsey struggling and had offered without hesitation, "What would I do without you, sweetheart?" Mrs. Dempsey smiled kindly, brushing silver hair from her forehead. Sarah smiled back, slightly embarrassed. "It's no trouble." Just as they reached the elevators, a voice startled them from behind. "You shouldn't have to do this alone." Mrs. Dempsey turned, surprised. "Mr. Caldwell?" Sarah froze. Mark Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Industries, stood a few feet away, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, his sleeves rolled slightly, no tie. He looked effortlessly commanding, yet his tone was gentle. He nodded at Mrs. Dempsey and then turned to Sarah. "What's your name?" he asked, his eyes calm and kind. Sarah hesitated. Her heart skipped. She instinctively tucked her hair tighter over her scar. Sarah Harper." Mark studied her for a second, not the way people usually did, not like he was searching for the scar or the awkwardness or the flaws, but as if he was seeing her for the first time. "Well, Sarah Harper," he said, "thank you for helping." And then he did something no CEO had done. He reached out, gripped the cart, and helped them push it the final few feet into the elevator. Later that day, back at her desk, Sarah's fingers trembled slightly as she typed her report. She could not shake the way he had looked at her. Not with pity, not with judgment, just quiet curiosity and something almost like respect. She had grown up believing the scar made her different, less than, something to hide. And yet, when she had spoken her name to him, she had done so with more steadiness than she thought she possessed, because he had not looked at the scar, he had looked into her eyes. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah began to wonder, what if being different did not mean being unworthy? What if the right eyes could see her differently? Mark Caldwell had only asked her name, but for Sarah Harper, that question had unlocked something she had long forgotten. Her worth was not defined by what people saw on the outside. It was defined by what she did, and someone had finally seen that. The meeting room on the 10th floor was glass-walled, sleek, and intimidating. It was the kind of place Sarah had only walked past, never entered. But that morning her name had been added to the meeting invite. Not to speak, of course, just to observe and learn from the senior team, as her supervisor had told her. So she sat in the back corner, notebook in hand, trying to steady her nerves. The presentation was about a new marketing campaign for a skincare client launching a next-gen product line. Slides flicked across the screen, buzzwords, colors, slogans. The head of marketing, a confident woman named Rachel, was laying it out with practiced polish. This campaign will target a 30 to 45 age demographic, with an emphasis on classic beauty, minimalism, and sophistication, Rachel explained. We are leaning away from trends and toward timeless. Sarah flipped through the printouts. Something felt off. She hesitated. Her palms began to sweat. Her eyes darted to the room full of executives, including Mark Caldwell at the head of the table. But the idea kept gnawing at her, and before she could stop herself, her hand was in the air. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a misplaced note in a symphony, "but I think this angle might alienate our younger demographic." The room fell silent. Rachel paused, mid-slide. All heads turned. Sarah's chest tightened. She could feel every eye on her. For a second she thought she might collapse under the weight of it all. Then Mark's voice came, calm and direct. "Why do you think that, Sarah?" She met his gaze. He was not testing her. He was genuinely asking. Sarah stood up. "Gen Z and younger millennials are currently the most active social media users, and they are driven by authenticity and inclusivity," she began, her tone gaining confidence. "If we push too far toward timeless beauty without acknowledging diversity or current values, we risk coming off as outdated or worse, out of touch." I ran a comparison of engagement metrics between minimalist campaigns and more value-driven ones on the same platform. Campaigns that emphasized inclusivity and real stories performed 36% better in engagement over the last 2 quarters. She held up her printout, her hands now steady. Rachel blinked. Someone near the window coughed awkwardly. Mark nodded slowly. "Thank you, Sarah. That was insightful." He looked around the room. Any objections? Silence. Then he said, "You just got your first project, Sarah. I want you to lead the concept revision." As the meeting ended, Sarah was still standing in place, stunned. Several people murmured congratulations, but not all the looks were friendly. One junior associate scoffed under his breath. Rachel gathered her files with a tight smile. Back at her desk, Sarah barely had time to process what had happened. She had spoken up. She had contradicted a superior. And yet, she had been heard. More than that, trusted. By the CEO. Mark walked by an hour later and paused at her desk. "Bold move in there," he said, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Sarah looked up, wary. "Was it too much?" Mark smiled. "It was exactly enough." He walked away. But behind her screen, Sarah exhaled a shaky breath and allowed herself a small, disbelieving smile. She had not planned to speak, but something inside her, something strong, had chosen that moment to rise. And that choice had just changed everything. The days blurred into nights. Sarah threw herself into the project with quiet determination, working long hours, rewriting pitch decks, coordinating with the design team, and triple-checking data sources. Her mind stayed sharp, but her body was wearing down. She skipped lunches, barely slept, and drank more coffee than water. Her supervisor praised her dedication. Mark occasionally passed by with a nod of approval, his eyes lingering for a second longer than necessary. But no one noticed how pale she had become, how her hands trembled slightly when she typed. Until one night, it was nearly 10 p.m. The floor was empty, the lights dim to motion sensor quiet. Sarah was still at the conference table, laptop open, editing the final presentation slides. Her vision blurred, but she ignored it. She just needed to finish this. The room tilted, her hands slipped off the keyboard. Then everything went black. The security guard found her first and radioed for help. Minutes later, Mark was rushing down the corridor, his footsteps echoing like thunder. When he saw her crumpled on the carpet, his stomach dropped. He did not hesitate. Mark scooped her into his arms and carried her straight to the medical room on the executive floor. He laid her gently on the cot, brushed the hair from her forehead, and whispered, "You're okay, just rest." The on-site nurse checked her vitals. Dehydrated, exhausted. Nothing serious, but it could have been. Mark stayed while she slept, sitting in the chair beside her. He rubbed his temples. He had noticed her fatigue. Why had he not said anything sooner? Before he left, he did two things. He called the kitchen and requested a bowl of congee, mild and warm, something his mother used to make. Then he tore a page from his notebook and wrote in clean, steady handwriting, "Take care of yourself, Sarah. You matter." He placed the note next to the bowl, turned off the light, and closed the door softly behind him. Sarah woke up just after dawn. The room was quiet, the blanket tucked around her shoulders. She sat up slowly, still groggy. Then she saw it. The bowl of porridge, still faintly warm, and the note. She picked it up with shaking fingers. Her eyes scanned the words once, twice. A tear slipped down her cheek. Nobody had ever written something like that to her. Not her teachers, not her foster parents, not even old friends. But someone had now. And that someone had carried her here. She held the note to her chest, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in a long time, she did not feel like a burden. She felt seen. She reached for the porridge and took a spoonful. It was simple, gentle, but to Sarah it tasted like care, and care was something she had learned to live without, until now. Sarah returned to work quietly, her body still weak from the exhaustion, but her mind sharp with renewed purpose. She poured herself into the campaign she had been entrusted with. Every graphic, every word, every audience test, she tackled them all like someone who had something to prove. And she did. Each day, she arrived early and stayed late. Her presentations were clearer, her confidence steadier. She no longer walked with her hair shielding her face. But confidence, she would soon learn, often drew as much judgment as admiration. One afternoon, Sarah passed by the break room just as two colleagues, Olivia and Brian, were talking. They did not see her pause outside the door. "Unbelievable," Olivia muttered, flipping through a design printout. "Comes in here with that scar on her face, barely talks to anyone, and now she's presenting to clients like she owns the place." Brian chuckled dryly. "Maybe sleeping with the CEO will get you the project. That girl isn't even pretty." Olivia scoffed. "Yeah, scarred and scared must be the new office chic." Sarah's heart thudded. The words echoed. She turned, hands shaking, and rushed toward the stairwell, holding back tears. Later that evening, she sat alone in an empty corner of the office, trying to focus. But her thoughts spun. The scar. Always the scar. She had spent years believing it was the reason she would never be truly seen, only pitied. And just when she thought she had moved past it, those words sliced deeper than she imagined they could. She started typing out her resignation. Mark found out the next morning. When he saw the unread email in his inbox titled, "Thank you and goodbye," he wasted no time. By noon, Olivia and Brian were called into the HR conference room. Mark arrived not as a CEO, calm and composed, but as a man who was deeply disappointed. "You represent this company," he said evenly. "You are responsible not only for the quality of your work, but the quality of your conduct." He paused, eyes fixed on Olivia. "Mocking someone's appearance, spreading personal rumors, that is not only cruel, it's unacceptable." He turned to HR. "We have zero tolerance for this." The room fell silent. After the meeting, Mark found Sarah in the quiet library lounge on the 8th floor. She looked up as he approached, the screen of her laptop glowing softly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know it's a distraction." Mark shook his head and sat beside her. "It's not your job to be invisible so others can feel safe," he said. She looked away, her voice cracking. "They said no one would ever take me seriously, not with this face." He turned toward her gently, then lifted his hand, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. His fingers paused on the faded scar. "This scar," he said softly, "doesn't make you less beautiful. It makes you unforgettable." Sarah blinked. His eyes were steady, not filled with pity, but something deeper. "It's part of you," he continued, "but it's not all of you. And I see every part." Her breath caught in her chest. For the first time in her life, someone had said the words she never knew she needed. She reached up, touching his hand still resting against her cheek. "I don't want to quit," she whispered. "Not anymore." "Good," Mark replied. And just like that, the scar no longer felt like something to hide. It felt like a badge of survival, of strength, and the beginning of something new. Spring turned to early summer, and Caldwell Industries buzzed with a new energy. The company unveiled its most ambitious community initiative yet, Bright Futures Scholarship, a fund aimed at supporting children recovering from severe burns. It combined education, therapy, and reintegration support, and Mark had entrusted Sarah with leading its development, a bold choice given her status as an intern, but one he made because of her insight, compassion, and lived experience. For days, Sarah juggled research, stakeholder meetings, design reviews, budget planning, and collaboration with external nonprofits. She held brainstorming sessions with colleagues, pulled all-nighters creating slide decks, and rehearsed her speech until her voice cracked. She wouldn't let the scar on her chin show, but now she barely noticed it. Her focus was on purpose, not perfection. On the morning of the launch event, the auditorium hummed with anticipation. Employees, donors, families, and community leaders filled the seats. A banner at the front read, "Bright Futures Scholarship, Igniting Hope, Restoring Confidence." Backstage, Sarah felt her heart pounding. Her palms were damp. She smoothed her blouse and breathed deeply. Mark appeared, offering a reassuring smile. He placed a gentle hand on her back. "You remember why this matters," he said softly. "Just speak from the heart." She nodded, tears in her eyes. She stepped forward as her name was announced. From the podium she paused and looked out at the crowd. Her voice wavered for a moment, then steadied. "Good morning. My name is Sarah Harper, and I am honored to stand before you today as a representative of Caldwell Industries, and more importantly, as someone who believes deeply in the power of healing and education." She greeted the families in the front row, children with bandaged skin and bright smiles. She glanced briefly at the banner. "As a child with my own burn scar, I know, not just as a statistic, but personally, how difficult it can be to feel seen, to feel worthy. Burns don't just affect the body, they leave marks on the heart, and those marks can be invisible to the world." She paused and took a breath, then continued. "This scholarship fund is built on more than financial support. It offers therapy, mentorship, and community workshops. It's built to restore confidence, to tell every child, your story is not your scar. You are so much more." She moved to the next slide, showing photos of smiling children, a school setting, mentors hugging participants. "Over the next year, we aim to reach 100 children, provide scholarships for college prep tutoring, emotional support services, and a community network that won't let them feel alone." Her original data, her own notes, her voice steadied by purpose, filled every statement with authenticity. When she finished, she stepped back, heart pounding, and waited. Silence hung for a moment. Then applause, slow at first, building into a standing ovation. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as colleagues and volunteers rose, some wiping eyes, others nodding in respect. Mark strode forward, clapping as loud as anyone. Afterwards, guests mingled, and the mood was warm. Donors shook Sheila's hand, families expressed gratitude. Sarah moved between groups, smiling, answering questions, no longer feeling like an imposter. She was home in this moment. Behind her she heard footsteps and turned to see Mark standing tall, watching her from across the room. He strode forward and wrapped her in a brief, proud hug. "You were amazing," he said quietly. Sarah exhaled. "I was scared," he smiled. "You were brave." He then guided her to the front again as the CEO took the stage to add remarks. Mark cleared his throat. His voice was firm and full of pride. "Today is more than a launch. It is a promise, a commitment to children who deserve more than pity. They deserve opportunity." He paused, then fixed his gaze on Sarah before addressing the audience. "And it is a special moment for me personally, because this project did not begin with me. It began with someone who spoke from her truth, someone who invited us all to listen. She's not just an intern. She's the heart of this mission." He looked at her, his admiration clear. Then he gestured to the audience. The applause swelled again, stronger than before. Colleagues who once eyed her warily now cheered her by name. Later, as the evening wound down, the crowd thinned. Sarah and Mark stayed behind. She looked at the trophy-like plaque he had arranged by the stage, her name engraved, acknowledging her leadership. She stared, overwhelmed. Mark faced her. "You earned every bit of this." She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I feel seen." He reached over and turned off the stage lighting. Soft ambient lamps glowed, and the two stood alone, surrounded by empty chairs and echoes of success. "I did," he replied, voice barely above a whisper. "And I hope the rest of the world will see you too." Sarah reached out and touched his arm. "Thank you." He nodded, took a slow breath, then dropped his voice. "You're incredible." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "No, I feel incredible because you trusted me." He met her gaze, understanding. No further words were needed. In that moment she knew she had crossed a threshold. From intern to someone who belonged. She had opened a door inside her, and he had given her the key. The evening air was crisp as Sarah and Mark stepped out onto the quiet walkway behind the office building. Stars shimmered overhead, and pool lights reflected off the surface of the small lake just beyond the manicured lawn. It was late, but Mark had asked her to stay a bit longer, and she had agreed, curiosity shining in her weary eyes. They walked side by side, footsteps echoing softly against the paved path. The hum of the city felt distant, replaced by the gentle lapping of water and rustling leaves. Sarah inhaled a steadying breath, hugging her blazer tight around her. She was still glowing from the triumph of the launch earlier. But I want to deserve this. I need to believe it. Mark stopped by a bench, his silhouette sharp against the park lamp's glow. He motioned to it with a quiet nod. They sat down, shoulders close but not touching, an electric proximity that neither acknowledged in words but both felt. They were silent at first. The night seemed to ask nothing but presence. "Beautiful night," Sarah said, her voice soft. She turned to look at him, the outline of his face softened by lamplight, and realized how his presence always calmed her. Like something steady she could lean into, Mark's shoulders relaxed. Yeah, quiet time is good. Sarah thought about pouring out thanks for everything he'd done, advocating for her, believing in her when others didn't, giving her purpose, but the words felt too cliched, too heavy for the moment. Instead, she looked at the lake, then at Mark. "Thank you. For tonight." He gave a small smile and reached into his coat pocket. For a moment she thought it was the note from earlier. Instead, he pulled out a small, polished hand mirror. He held it out to her, smooth metal copper reflecting sidewalk lights. "Look inside," he said. Sarah tilted her head, taken aback. He tapped the mirror softly. "See yourself." She raised it slowly, her fingers trembling. At first she saw the scar staring back. But then, eyes meeting in the glass, something shifted. She looked whole, strong, serene, brave. Mark's voice hovered over the quiet stillness. "That's who you are every time I look at you." Sarah's throat constricted. She looked up, searching his face. He added, softly but certain. "Strong," he said, pausing to let the words settle. "Brilliant, and so beautiful." She swallowed, finger brushing the mirror's edge. "No, Her voice trailed off. Words felt inadequate. Mark reached out and gently lowered the mirror. His hand brushed hers in transit, simple but electric. He didn't say more. He didn't need to, because his gaze said everything. Sarah looked down at her hands, then back up at him. She felt warmth flood through her chest, filling the space that insecurity had occupied for so long. He shifted a bit closer on the bench, an unspoken invitation. She met his eyes, then smiled, soft, genuine, calm. That rarely felt perfect, but it felt like truth. Mark closed his eyes, took a breath, and reached for her hand. His touch was light, tentative, respectful, but undeniable. She let him take it. She felt the pulse in his palm, and she felt her own heart finally quiet. They sat in silence, hands joined, sharing comfort without words. In that moment, there was no need for a grand gesture, no need for flowers, declarations, or promises. Just this, recognition that the person across from you saw you, all of you, and thought you were enough. No fireworks necessary, just belonging. Sarah rested her head on his shoulder for a heartbeat. He rested his forehead gently against hers. That single breath, calm and open, sealed something tender between them. No bouquet growing brighter than his eyes, no needless poetry, just two hearts, visible and softly, perfectly seen. They remained seated until the hush of the lake blended into their quiet certainty. The night sky watched over them, serene as the lake's reflection, and the world beyond flickered faintly. But here, in that space, they were wholly together. No words were left unsaid, no shadows left unshared. Sarah surrendered to a feeling she never thought she deserved, and Mark simply held her. It had been a year since Sarah Harper took the stage at the launch of the Bright Futures Scholarship. In that time she had grown, not just in responsibility, but in confidence. From nameless intern to director of the New Skin, New Hope program, she now led efforts to support burn survivors worldwide with education, healing, and community. Yet, even as her role expanded, Sarah remained modest. She had never been the type to crave limelight. Instead, she thrived behind the scenes, consulting with medical professionals, collaborating with schools, mentoring students, and refining campaign strategy. She commanded respect not by raising her voice, but by touching hearts. And that night, standing in the grand ballroom of the Caldwell Center, she felt every emotion converge into the soft warmth that pulsed in her chest. The room, full of donors, media, medical experts, and survivors, shimmered with anticipation. The stage was set for the annual New Skin, New Hope Gala, where a new initiative would be unveiled, a scholarship fund focused on vocational training and digital education for young survivors entering the workforce. Sarah stepped out from behind the curtain. The lights picked her out in a ribboned off-spotlight. Cameras clicked. A hush fell. Then the applause began, steady, rolling, surprised by the raw emotion they heard in her voice. At the edge of the stage, Mark stood tall, suit sharp, but no speech tonight. He nodded at her, fingers brushing hers in silent encouragement. She took a breath. "Good evening," she said, slight tremble in her voice, because she still felt it, the weight of being judged. But she stood strong. "I'm Sarah Harper, Director of New Skin, New Hope." She looked across the crowd, some familiar faces from hospitals, some survivors who wore their own scars, and some board members who once doubted her. They smiled back with reassurance. "Tonight, we announce our next step, Bridge to Independence. We are awarding 20 children with fully funded vocational training, design, coding, culinary arts, skills that lead to careers, not just survival. We are partnering with colleges and companies committed to seeing potential beyond scars." The screen behind her lit up with budding professionals, some in work uniforms, some in classrooms, faces of pride and determination. She paused. "I became part of this community not because of perfection. I became its advocate, because I was seen, accepted, not despite my scar, but with it." Her voice caught. She reached into her pocket, gently touching the spot on her blouse closest to her heart. The scar below her left eye faded now, but still a reminder of her journey. She continued, voice steady, "I never needed to be perfect. I only needed to be seen. And someone saw me with his heart, gave me this opportunity to see others, to be their voice," she finished. The room erupted in applause, rose petals of approval drifting through the air as Mark descended the stage to join her. He offered his arm, a gesture of partnership. With each step, the audience felt the connection that needed no explanation. During the reception that followed, photographers captured moments, but one image stood above all. As Sarah crossed back to her seat, Mark dipped forward, wrapped one hand gently around her face, and placed a soft kiss directly on her scar. It was quiet, intimate, powerful. The flash went off. The crowd gasped, then whispered in awe. That image spread fast on news feeds and social media, under headlines like "CEO Honors Director's Scar at Gala" and "Beauty Beyond Perfection, Powerful Kiss." It became a symbol of love without conditions, of acceptance made public. Later in the evening, Sarah gave a second speech, more informal, more personal. She spoke softly into the microphone. Tonight was never just about program funding. It was always about courage, mine, theirs, ours. So if you ask me why I stand here now, it is because someone looked deeper. Because someone chose me when I was still an intern. Because someone decided the world should know how incredible a burned child could become. She tapped the scar with her fingertip, a gentle nod of recognition. This mark on my face was a reminder of everything I believed I was not. I tried to hide it. I tried to run from it. But today, thanks to the people who believed in me, my team, our donors, the students, this scar is not a secret. It is a source of strength. Another round of warm applause. Eyes glistened. Parents hugged their children. Sarah looked at Mark, quiet, proud, loving. She closed with her line, "I never needed to be perfect. I only needed to be seen. And someone saw me with his heart." In the weeks that followed, the gala's success sent the program soaring. Applications jumped by 50%, donations doubled. But the story that went viral wasn't the funding, it was the kiss. That single image became the movement's icon. People wrote letters. Survivors shared photos of their own scars with pride. Parents reached out. saying their children had finally found role models who didn't hide. Sarah's life shifted. She still worked tirelessly, but now she did it with the weight of the world's support on her shoulders. The scar on her face became her trademark, a testament to strength. Mark, for his part, never withdrew from public life. He stood by her at board meetings, at hospital visits, at city council events, always close, always warm, never overbearing. They did not exchange rings at the gala. There was no dramatic proposal. But some nights, they strolled the lake behind the office, silence between them soft and real. And some nights, as they left events, he held her steady and she felt seen and loved without words. One afternoon, months later, they walked through the office on a tour with city officials. Students from the program visited. Sarah smiled and introduced them by name. And when she passed Mark, he looked at her and said, quietly but firmly, "You are changing the world." She smiled. He smiled back. They walked forward, side by side, scar and support, showing the world that loving someone means seeing them completely and holding them with your heart. And for Sarah, that had always been enough. No flowers, no grand declarations, just the quiet joy of being seen and being loved for exactly who she was. If this story moved you, if you felt seen, understood, or inspired, then you are exactly who we create these stories for. Because behind every scar, every silent struggle, there's a voice that deserves to be heard, and a heart that deserves to be loved. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more unforgettable tales of resilience, compassion, and quiet courage. We bring you real, emotional, life-changing narratives that stay with you long after the final scene. Turn on notifications, share this video with someone who needs hope, and remember, sometimes all it takes is one moment of being seen to change everything. We'll see you in the next story.